welcome everybody, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. This webinar is part of a Community Climate Action Programme project, and that project is called Creating Centres of Excellence for Community Climate Action, being run here in Cloughjordan Eco-Village with partners of excuse me, the Burren College of Art, Carrickdooler Permaculture Farm and Sonarta National Ecology Centre. And what we're doing is we are looking at the challenges faced by place-based learning centres, and we aim to provide a set of resources that address those challenges. These webinars are part of that response. It's important to know that these will be recorded and will be made available as part of our toolkit, which should be in the next month or two. It is funded by the Government of Ireland through the Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications. So I'll hand back to you, Chris, and we can get going with the interesting stuff.
Great to see people, and Eileen will come back in at the end to talk about the next week's webinar as well, just to make sure everybody knows about that. So lovely to see people. I suspect we might still have one or two more people joining us, but you're all very, very welcome. So my name's Chris Chapman. I lead facilitation on behalf of Burren College of Art, who are one of the partners of the project that Eileen was mentioning. And I was particularly interested when we were talking about doing a series of webinars. I was particularly interested in this subject of how we mind ourselves, how we look after ourselves as people involved in different parts of climate action, whether it's as activists or scientists or different professional roles that different people may have. And I suppose there's kind of three things that were in my mind really when we were thinking about what webinars to do and why might we do this one. Firstly, I suppose just those of us that have been around for a while, and I know without wanting to insult anybody's age, I see a few people on the call who have been around for a while. We know that the business we're in, climate action and related causes, a lot of people do burn out. A lot of people have health and energy issues that are directly related to trying to work too hard, or just the way it works. We'll explore more about the why in a minute, but we know it's a kind of a fact of our lives that we're familiar with. So there's a kind of human compassionate piece. That's, I think, the first thing. The second thing is, I suppose, if we just think about it in terms of climate action and being an effective movement, an effective ecology of people doing different things, the fact that quite a lot of us are unwell sometimes, and sometimes with burnout we can be unwell for a long time, that obviously undermines the effectiveness of the movement. So if we're trying to do climate action, having a lot of us having health problems isn't helpful. So that's another reason to give it a bit of focus. And then I suppose the third reason that kind of makes it feel particularly relevant to be doing this is just the nature of the times we're in. I think quite a lot of us are feeling that 2024 and maybe the next few years are going to be pretty tough and pretty challenging. So I don't need to go into a big lecture about that, but there's reasons to think these could be tough times. And so we want to minimize the casualties. We want to work on the well-being and the support for each other. It might just from a Burren College of Art point of view, and there's a few people here associated with the college in different ways, which is lovely to see. From a Burren College point of view, it might be worth saying as well, the Burren is a place that's particularly associated with well-being. So, we've Lisdoonvarna just to the south of the Burren as people will know, a spa town of long standing. But it is, the Burren is a place where people are, hopefully people are well, but hopefully also visitors come and are re-energized, and it's the combination of the ecology and being next to the Atlantic and everything does seem to help have some relationship with wellness. So that's another reason, I suppose, why it's a subject that's close to our hearts. So most of the session today I'm going to be in conversation with Luea Ritter, who I'm delighted has been able to join us. But also, as we go along, we'll be encouraging people to put things in the chat, and whether it's questions or comments or suggestions or whatever. So we'll try to have some good bit of interaction with the chat along the way. So anyway, yeah, Luea, as I delighted that Luea is joining us, is currently in Greece, was a co-founder of an organisation called Collective Transitions. So I think the clue's in the name there, that we're in the right kind of territory. And in terms of what we're doing today, particularly had a role at the last COP28, in relation to supporting the well-being of young delegates, young people who were there as part of the COP. So that felt super interesting in terms of the webinar we're trying to do today, and this subject, burnout, climate action, trying to bring these pieces together. So Luea, how would you like to describe what you do in the world? I always think it's better for people to introduce themselves rather than be introduced by other people that don't know you as well as you know yourself.
Thank you, Chris. And first of all, thank you for the invitations. Lovely to be here with you. And thank you for calling in such a topic and also such a series that is building upon the different aspects to be mindful of when we feel called to contribute to the times we live in such a way. How I describe myself, I always find that difficult. Probably I do care deeply for the well-being of us as humans, but especially in relation to what we could call the natural world, including the subtle and all forms of life, where I include glaciers, rivers, mountains, etc. And probably these days I am kind of guiding, stewarding longer term transition processes, and how to be in that space between, how to stay afloat, buoyant, especially as collectives in that liminal space where we do not have the answers yet or not anymore. We may feel confused, and we may feel also confronted with a new form of complexity, and not even imagining, but re-feeling, re-embodying how we could be together with all there is, and how to navigate that space. Not that I would know the answers, for sure not, but I deeply love complexity and somehow I love to be in the wilderness. So yeah, probably something like that.
Brilliant, thanks, Luea. And I'm just seeing that Eileen's encouraging people to introduce themselves in the chat as well. And God, we got Trace from Kansas City. That's amazing in terms of our reach. So you're very welcome. I see Kathy from Malta as well. So we are reaching places around the world, which is great. Maybe Luea, you might say a little bit about your particular role with the COP, and tell us the story a little bit about what you were doing with the youth delegates and what was going on there.
Yeah, so maybe briefly, it's a program that started 2 years ago and had its first iteration during COP27, initiated by 4 young women who have in different roles been active in the COP space, either as negotiators or in other forms, youth ambassadors, and felt that in most delegations, youth voices are not represented. And if, then it's more a token that is brought along, but actually then becoming more secretary roles and assistants rather than actually bringing really their agency and voice to the table. And they felt that there is a deeply big gap of actually even having an orientation of how this space functions, which is highly dense, concentrated under huge pressure, stress, and highly complex, the topic in itself, of course. And so they started a program that is a 5 months online program with youth delegates from multiple countries, where the countries themselves are signing up to an MOU with the organization that they are agreeing to bring these youth that get trained by that program actually into negotiation seats or delegate seats. So there is an accountability also towards the countries, and not just training youth people, and then nobody actually really acknowledges their position, but having countries that try at least to find a new way of bringing them in. And part of this program is, of course, learning how the UN functions and how the COP space is organized, or better saying UNFCCC space is organized, the history, etc. But also then a lot of leadership and softer skills of how to actually communicate, because their aim is also to not only bring youth to the table, but bring another culture of how to be in dialogue together, how to even come to decisions, how to even negotiate together. So the culture of dialogue, the culture of communication, the culture of listening, of how to be together is very much at the forefront of their attention, and how to create a culture of care rather than a culture of who are the parties that win and who gets, whatever they want. So it has an implicit worldview shift in the way they even approach the program, and not make the youth delegates become, the delegates that we know today, and with its rigidity. And part of that is also, of course, the mental health care, because all of them have been engaged in youth organizations since they're teenagers. So they have seen with their own experience of how intense it can be. And so the mental and well-being part, and then the core support is critical for them. So they called upon my support, especially for the softer skill in the online program, and then also on site of how to be creating that community space, that container, that when you don't anymore, when you feel angry about whatever happened in your delegation, or confused about how negotiations are just right now playing out, that there are people to go to and talk to cry, to vent, whatever is needed, and to acknowledge that mental health and emotional well-being and the way I can be present with all is equally important than the ability to grasp all the facts and figures and all the documents that are sent and have been prepared, etc. And in that way become more, create another culture, basically, that is filled with awareness and presence and truly listening to the issues at stake that need a lot of compassion, because we come from so many different realities and perspectives, and that you only can try to grasp if your heart is really open. And for a heart to be really open and not overflown, you need some form of grounding to even be able to metabolize what you're hearing as real stories from the ground. So that was a bit my role over the last 2 years now.
Brilliant, thank you. And so, I mean, obviously the COP is a very particular, strange environment, but whether, I mean, I'm just looking at people introducing themselves in the chat, whether people are artists in Mayo, or activists, or people working in projects. We all find ourselves in these kind of challenging places, where we care greatly about the issues and what we're trying to achieve, and often it's enormously frustrating. People don't want to listen, or things just aren't working, or whatever. So just in the particular role that you had at the COP, what did you do to try and support people's mental health, and try and make it a relatively healthy experience for these young people?
So we started in the online program introducing self-care practices, and I think we later in our conversation will also look at one of the frameworks that I'm using. We practiced in the online calls that were happening every 2 months over 5 months, every 2 weeks, sorry, over 5 months, with deep listening practices, with mindfulness practices, with public speaking exercises where they support each other. And in that sense, we kind of already, started to use these muscles that maybe sometimes go completely unnoticed, depending on which environment we are or where we try kind of fulfill an expectation of a superior person in our job, and then actually forget that it's a lot around these finer, subtle things. So that's one thing, how we prepared, and also calling upon their cultural practices, whatever that may be, being it a more belief or faith-based practice or traditional, whatever it is, may it be dancing, singing, praying, finding people to talk about, or finding your own, also finding like, am I more an extrovert or more an introvert? I may need different things depending on what's my characteristic, and really acknowledging that we are different people, processing in different ways, learning in different ways. And then when we came together, we had an in-person module before, 3 days before COP actually started, where we looked a lot on these things as well, next to actually simulating an actual negotiation with fake countries, but with real text. And creating that community. So you have to imagine these are 125 negotiators from more than 55 countries. Some of them have never traveled abroad or been exposed to any other culture. So even just being for 5 months, quite intense, because they also had other calls in between, in relationship with each other's reality, and having a lot of breakout sessions, getting to know their realities, and doing exercises where they get to know different perspectives of different maybe positions. It kind of expanded their horizon, and also like, okay, my reality may be actually similar than someone totally across the world, or that's very different from mine or from our issues on the ground, etc. So, and it created deep friendships. And it was not anymore, you're from this country and I'm from that country, but it was like, this is your name and this is my name. So the way they met in then the in-person module before we will all go together to the COP was already like, we are humans and we are all here because we care. Maybe one of us is caring more for human communities, others maybe more for the forest communities. There are differences, but the deep running river that all of them felt themselves connected to is that deep care for each other, for our shared future, basically. And that was the ground. And then, of course, we had shared each day an intentional prompt to reflect on their way to the COP's venue. We had debriefings throughout the whole time, every day. We had check-ins with each one individually. How are you doing? We had a hotspot, so a place where we were present 8 hours a day, where they just could drop in. There were some snacks, because eating at COP is a rare occasion. So you have to be very well prepared with snacks and drinks and everything, that you can get something between all the meetings that constantly get rescheduled. So yeah, these were the kind of pillars I think we built up that then created some form of skeleton to at least, a flotilla, let's say. It was not a perfect boat, but it gave some structure to stay in that buoyancy.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, the more I reflect on this kind of subject, the more I feel those of us who organise different kinds of activities, which is probably most of us, have some kind of duty of care towards the people that we're bringing in and working with. And so that what you're describing there is so rich. So there's so many elements of that, and all the pillars as you just described them, the using the muscles in advance, the self-knowledge, the different aspects of that, the preparation for what we're going to be doing, making sure we're working in reality and not just kind of working in a pretend world. I love the bit about human friendship. I love setting intentions for reflection. I love that food's part of it. There's loads and loads of really good bits in what you're saying. I don't like to kind of go too far there, but I'm wondering when there must have been some days where, at least for some individuals, things went a bit badly wrong and people actually had some very tough times individually. So maybe just to kind of finish with this part of the story, yeah, what were the supports, or how did it work when somebody just said, look, I can't do this. This is too difficult, too much.
I mean, there were different ways of how people experienced it and then responded to this. Some, luckily, we had this kind of level of trust built beforehand, and that they knew us. So quite a lot came to me, for example, or some of us, and we were just sitting and listening. And I think what was really, and then the tears may come out, or the venting and the actual anger, and the, like, how can that be? Really, is that how it goes here? And so I think that low threshold of just being there and available, and if someone just comes and wants to sit and eat an apple and then go again, is totally fine. So not having that expectation, you have to tell us something, but also not just like keeping it in the small talk when you actually feel, whoa, someone is very agitated or very fragile or so. And of course, with my background as a trauma therapist and other healing modalities, I can pick up very easily if I feel like, oh, there's something in the air here. And then kind of giving the hand of the person itself, deciding if he want to share. But then when it was opened up, what I felt often was actually and it keeps being something that I more and more explore. People felt, oh, my reality or my perception is not right, and I should see it differently or experience it differently, or not getting it fully, or either by the delegation or by what happened in the working strands and the negotiation tracks. And just the fact of being acknowledged, no, your reality is as valuable and maybe even critical to bring to the table, and not dismissing one's own perception or voice, and not feeling ashamed to feel different than the others, for example. That was often very a powerful shift of suddenly, oh yeah, it's true. My questions may actually be of support rather than showing a weakness that I don't get it or so. But then what I also encountered, and I think, again, we will probably come back to that later, is there's a lot of trauma in that space. Personal trauma, intergenerational, collective, and that pops up. And that pops up not only in people who come from cultures where that's acknowledged, but also in cultures, especially where this may not be, where mental health is even like something never to talk about, right? And just to acknowledge, yes, that is also, can also be here with us, and we are not kind of neglecting it or pushing it away, nor making it bigger and then kind of make a drama out of it, but just acknowledge, yeah, there is a lot at stake here, from literal survival to an anxiety of, having a loss of biodiversity or land or whatever, to, yeah, all the other layers of traumas that are not directly maybe linked to climate change, but are getting triggered by the sense of scarcity in some form of way. So yeah, that included sometimes, having a call in the middle of the night by someone who just doesn't see it anymore, and just being there and listening, and knowing we are available all the time. I think that fact of knowing we are here, no matter what. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, Luea, that's great. I'm going to move the conversation on a bit. So moving on from the COP, I've just put in the chat the kind of the first question that we had in the promotion for this session, which was, why might people working in climate action, with the different kinds of roles that we've all got, whether we're artists or community workers or working in colleges or working in different kinds of centres. Why might we be at particular risk of burnout? And I'm just using burnout as a very general kind of catch-all for health difficulties and exhaustion, and it comes up for different ones of us in different ways. And we're not going to go into a kind of big medical version of it. So thank you, Eileen. I'm just exactly that. I'm encouraging, if anybody wants to come in and just throw in words that feels important and significant for you as a response to that question, as to why you think people involved in climate action might be at particular risk. I did, in kind of preparing for the webinar, I had a look kind of at some of the general research around burnout, and obviously that some of this may seem pretty obvious, but there's particular risks of burnout where people are very, very dedicated to their work. We keep going longer than we might do if we were in other jobs or other roles. One of the things I thought was really interesting coming out in some of the literature was stuff about working conditions. This fits through what I was trying to say earlier about a duty of care. So clearly the environment we're in, the working conditions we're in, have an effect on us. It's not just us as individual human beings. And then there's a whole business around a gap between our ideals and reality. So that, I suspect dissonance might be a kind of a word for it. That just the better world we know is possible, the world we dream of, the world that's that's effectively responded to climate action, just feels so far from the world we're dealing with day to day. But Luea, your response to the general question. So, when we think about all these human beings who are trying to do something in the field of climate action, why might they be more at risk than some other human beings, maybe?
Yeah, and thank you for the responses. I resonate with all that is already shared here. I think it really has to do, and I don't want to generalize, but I do feel, at least here more in the West, we have cultivated a culture that is has care pockets, but is not generally anymore kind of enlivening care across everything. Where it would be normal, if I see a suffering animal, I would feel equal sense of care as if I would see someone I love being in a painful situation. And that immediate okay, I'm called to help, or at least find some form or way to support issues. For me, brought me down to the question, why do we even have a climate crisis and other crises, which I like to use the word polycrisis these days, or social ecological crises, because there's something deeply hurts deep down, or separated or divided or fractured, fragmented in the way we are currently the dominant system, I would say. And so for me, everyone kind of deeply caring about climate issues, nature, other forms than life, other forms than human or beyond humans, I feel like we are directly connected with that deep wound or that deep pain of something has been separated that actually belongs together, or is at least interrelated, interdependent with each other. And so, but what I feel like I haven't grown up in a culture where it was okay to address these pain points, or to at least acknowledge that's also in the mix when we work on, climate actions and try to fight for the climate. So the way I see often activists or people working in climate, it's still very much informed by fighting against, fighting, and this kind of like, this is more important than something else, while actually at the end, all the kind of social movements are or societal change movements are actually trying to, how can we heal these wounds and come to new forms of understanding? And I would say every sector or field that is working on these deeper layers, directly or indirectly through their actions, need to take that into account as part of the work, that the healing and the acknowledgement of that deeper layer fracturedness, or nature of fracturedness, to find practices that we can metabolize these things and also acknowledge how it lives in us. So if a big part of my work is informed by the sense of what I'm doing outside or want to bring to the world is something that I also need. So it's not a separation between my outer work and then how I am maybe inside, as well as the climate crisis is not just an outer crisis, it's also a crisis of relationship, a crisis of values, a crisis of belonging. And how am I dealing with that? How am I suffering from that? How am I dealing and supporting myself and living through these transformative movements as part of the how we do what we do, feels, at least for me, very critical. And I see still too little language of articulating that the how we do things, including how we are with ourselves, is the response to things that we see are in crisis. And a lot, I feel, is we have to refigure out of how we do things. And that starts by first contemplating and reflecting of where have we come from, what is missing currently, what have we maybe forgotten to call upon, or do we need to cultivate? So that cultivation of practices, rituals, maybe even capacities individually and as groups, to actually then, when the shit hits the van because we maybe meet another position in a political realm or another movement that thinks totally the opposite, that we are actually ready and not in terms of like we can fight as armors and knights, but as we can. I like the metaphor of the Aikido, or where you take the energy of your opponent and you kind of find a new way of transforming it into strength, not to then push the other down, but finding a new way of dealing actually with that force that may come against you, by way of speaking. Yeah, so I'm maybe not making sense, I don't know, but these are kind of that comes up when you ask me this question.
Yeah, no, I think there's lots of sense, and kind of listening to you, Luea, and also looking at some of the comments in the chat, I just get the real sense of this is deep. This is about as existential as it could be, and really, really fundamental and deep, and also that it's constant. That people are, people's lives day to day are full of this. So for a lot of people, a lot of us, I'm not just talking about other people, it's about me as well. This stuff is just constantly with us. We're constantly trying to find it. We're constantly feeling let down that we're not having the conversations we want to have. We're not seeing the progress we want to see. Trace, I saw your comment just there about microcosm and macrocosm. Do you want to expand a little bit on that, to unmute maybe, Trace, and just say a little bit about the micro and the macro?
Sure. It comes from my background. I went to med school. I did a whole bunch of human biology, psychoneuroimmunology, but I just feel like what we see outside of ourselves is happening inside. I mean, just take our microbiome, for instance. Like we're obliterating it on a daily basis by the foods we put into it, by the antibiotics, by our stress levels, all of these things. And to think that we as humans are human, it's like 1-to-3 ratio of human cells to the microcosm that inhabits and that makes us up, and that actually facilitates our existence. So I just think that the more we damage this microcosm and microbiome, it's just a reflection, or because we do this, it enables us to destroy the world on a bigger scale. So, but it also, the more we heal this, the more we can heal things in a bigger scale as well. It works both ways. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Trace. I see you nodding and agreeing, Luea. I don't know whether you want to add anything to what Trace was just saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, it's so evident that there is not this illusion of split between what is inner and outer, what is small and large, what is personal and collective. We are constantly in dialogue and exchange and co-influencing each other. So, and that's, for example, also something that I wonder sometimes in climate movements, how much is that worldview of interconnectedness really at the forefront, which then actually, I would not just fight for better water, but I would also tend to, indeed, like how I'm nourishing myself for the rest, or how I would, recycle waste, for example, or use electricity or. So, yeah, I think there is just to loosen up the sense of what is separated or feels separated. I think there is a clue there, and then there becomes more. Yeah, it feels maybe more complex in the first place, or more overwhelming even. But I feel it gives me a lot more nourishment to feel I'm not just working on this topic, but also the way of how I am taking care, then again, has an information of how I can be present to someone's issues or a request from outside. So, yeah, it also has to do with stopping splitting. That's my private life and that's my work. And I think that's often also in the climate space or in any kind of activism space. This is at least for me, I don't feel this is my life and this is my work. But we still live in a world where we kind of separate these things, and we haven't. I don't think we have a lot of role models of how to balance that healthily. Do not feel I have to now take vacation from my work, but also acknowledging I have to regenerate as a living organism, as part of a dedicated to regenerate our bigger organism together.
Yeah, I'm struck by, I've said over the years, like all the conversations I would have heard or been part of about, say, people would talk about work-life balance as if these are these two separate things. I'm going to work really hard on climate change for 38 hours a week or something, and then I'm going to play golf at the weekend or something, and it's going to be completely different. And the two things have got no relationship or no connection. And that never made a lot of sense to me. I'm really struck by, when I've been around climate action things for a long time, and a lot of people do position it as fighting. We are fighting against the evil capitalist or the bankers or the fossil fuel industry or whatever. And what you're bringing into the conversation, what I heard Trace echoing, is a very different perspective. It's what I hear and feel is we are human beings in a process of trying to find out how to do this human being thing a bit better. And we can kind of just be compassionate to ourselves that, there's loads of reasons why we would find this difficult, and it's not easy. But also just, not constantly setting it up as splits and separations and against. So how we frame the work, how we position the work feels very relevant to how well we're going to be, how healthy we're going to be.
Yeah,
that's probably the insight I'm taking.
Yeah, I can only underline that. And I have started to ask myself regularly the question, am I doing with my action, am I contributing with my action to more fragmentation and divide? Actually, if I would be honest, or am I actually really helping that things come again together, maybe not, you know, to agree on all the things, but at least to narrow the space that feels like we are different, or narrow the gap of, you know, extreme polarities or something like that, and seeing more like there's a spectrum of things. And that's for me, yeah, a question I need to ask myself, just to keep myself accountable. What am I actually really, if I speak up for something, am I coming from a place of like, you're wrong and I'm right? If I would go further down, even though I may have nice phrasing of it, and kind of covering up, but actually coming in with a charge that the other person surely intuitively can pick up? Or am I really making the work inside of me also available, that where is my own separation that I'm creating or could overcome in the way I can show up to things that are maybe challenging for sure. And not to want to say that we shouldn't feel anger or, you know, sadness or grief or all of that. So the question is more probably how to be with them, that they don't dominate me, but I can work with them and not perpetuate the patterns that I would say have led us into these times that we are living right now. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to keep us moving. The question I want to come into now is about how we approach self-care. So, you know, here we are, human beings trying to do difficult things. I certainly have health issues, which I think are directly related to the work I try and do, and I'm sure the way I'm doing it. I accept some responsibility for my self-care. You know, it's not just a case of when I'm ill, I'm going to go to the doctor and expect them to sort me out. And so, yeah, as Julie has done there, please, you know, respond to the question in the chat, and, you know, all the stuff that people are putting in the chat along with the recording of the session is going to help inform the web resource that Eileen mentioned at the beginning of the session that we're trying to develop, that will support people doing climate action work. But I know we have a graphic that we'll share in just a second, Luea, but just as a general, your general response to the question, how do you approach self-care? Yeah, how do you look after yourself?
Myself, you mean me?
Yeah.
I've had a range of things. So my moving is very important for me, and I can feel if I'm sitting too long still, which is a very big possibility to work at. So yoga and workout, walking outside. I live in nature consciously, intentionally, because I know I need to rebalance and recalibrate myself on a daily basis in order that I can hold the intensities that the work brings up. So my choice of where I live is a big factor. And then I meditate, and I have a spiritual practice that has evolved over time and is inspired by different lineages. And that's since a long, long time. So writing, my journal is where I get clarity on things that kind of rumble in my depths, and I can't really access it when I think. So I have to write, and then it comes out. And just, connecting with my breath. Food is important. We have our own garden and our own vegetables, which again is on one hand a connection to other forms of life, but is also a feeling I know how to nurture myself. I almost became a naturopath, so I have also this inclination of, you know, how are things actually informing my system, or the way I eat, the way I combine food, the way when I eat them. So I would say for me, it's a whole range, and I can feel if I'm not doing them together, it weakens a bit my system. And I do have regular moments where I'm not doing all of them, or in a lesser way than I know my disciplined self and my mature self would feel okay with. So for me, it's my base. Without that, I could not even sit here with you guys, if I'm very honest.
Thank you, and I really appreciate as well the comments people are adding in the chat. Mary Hawkes Green, I don't know if I can come to you just because I'm seeing Mary's looking slightly to one side, but I was just listening to Luea talking about place, and obviously we would have talked lots over the years, Mary, about the power of the Burren. So Mary, for people who don't know, is the president of Burren Art College. And maybe just how does I was going to ask you, Mary, how the Burren, how the place that you're in, this special place, how does that support your well-being and your ability to deal with the challenges that are in front of you?
Well, the reason you saw my looking sideways, I was actually writing into the chat at the very answer to that question.
There we go.
Which was, that for me, and I've seen it so clearly we get a lot of international students and various other people coming to the Burren. And so it's not only for me, but I witness what happens to them when when you're just allow yourself to be totally immersed in nature. And we're lucky to be in a place here where it's really stark and nature is very visible. You've got sheer limestone pavement, you've got hills, you've got sea, you've got the elements. It's raw, it's untainted. And when you can be out in that landscape, in that place, if you feel like it, going into the cold sea and just climbing up a hill when the wind is howling and the rain is battling, and as well as sometimes the sun is shining too, it's all good. But it's just it just clears away everything. I mean, it's just so totally it's cleansing, it's healing, it's I suppose it's just you feel, even though we're talking about climate change, you feel the power, the beauty, the enormity, the strength of nature and of the elements. And you realize how tiny you are. You're the grain of sand in the midst of it all. And really, stop worrying about yourself, because nature is powerful, and it will survive whatever about us. And it's both powerful and gently healing. It's amazing that it can be both at the same time. And I've witnessed that a lot particularly with students who come and may have many, they do have are stricken with anxiety and all kinds of mental anxiety and problems, and there's a peace to be found in the landscape and in nature. But it takes a while before one gets to the stage of being able to open oneself up to it and just be kind of like relax into it and allow it to permeate and to kind of almost osmotically kind of just fill you up. But it's amazing.
Thanks, Mary. That's beautiful. So lots of smiles and nods from Luea there. I was wondering, Pada, I was seeing your comment in the chat there. I don't know if you're able to unmute. And I suppose recognizing that for some people I'm interpreting your comment, there's a spiritual dimension to this. So part of our well-being, and it can be different for different people, but part of our well-being can be reinforced by a spiritual dimension. I don't know whether maybe you might say a little bit to that, Pada.
Yeah, happy to do so. It does seem to me that we have completely misinterpreted the sort of traditional religious emphasis on belief as being a set of sort of mental assertions that we agree to certain things. Belief to me is a far deeper thing. And it's, essentially a belief in the essential goodness of everything and of everyone, and that goodness is going to win out, even though everything seems to be against it. Both the levels of violence in our world at a very massive level, like wars, but even the levels of interpersonal violence, and of course the ways in which we're doing violence to all the many species that we share this beautiful planet with. And yet, to me, belief and trust, I suppose trust is another word for it, that there is a much bigger, we're held by something much bigger. And I think we need to cultivate that. And I think Thomas talked about meditation in the chat. That for me is essential. And I think some people sometimes interpret that as being sort of a cop-out, you know, that we're not really facing the real seriousness of what we're facing. And for me, it's not. I mean, it's, in many ways, it's the practice of meditation, and it's holding to this deeper sense of trust that actually allows you to be vulnerable in the face. I mean, to really face the enormity of what we're doing. My experience in life is it's the people that don't have those spiritual practices that sort of run for cover because facing the reality is just too stark. So it's almost holding contradictions together there. But anyway, for me, that's absolutely essential.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pada. I'll thank you for all the comments in the chat as well. So I see Nadine and Kathy, and hopefully we'll hear other voices as we go along as well. So Luea, you have a model or whatever. So I'm going to put a link. Hopefully not everybody will run away and go and look at it too much, but I'm going to put a link to an article, and then I'll share screen and show your model maybe, and you might just talk us through how you conceptualize kind of your thinking around self-care and so on.
Yes.
So hopefully.
Yeah, and just not to expect too much, but it was and the blog is now a bit older, so it needs some revision. But basically, coming from this understanding, there is not just the inner work or an outer work, but it's both at the same time. And when we work on, especially these kind of more systemic, intense challenges in the outer, that the importance of balancing that out with an inner work, both individually but especially also as groups, is critical. So acknowledging inner outer goes together, and again, to kind of help dissolve our conditioned state of things are separate. And then in conversations with people, we were talking about that, and I was like, what is that inner work? What is then that personal practice that we talk? And so basically, I just tried to sketch down what I do myself. So really learning a bit from myself or what I have witnessed with others. So it's far from complete, please. That's important as a disclaimer. So I want to start with the daily practice, which multiples of you have responded, and like I shared before, contemplative practice, being with my body, meditating, reflection moments throughout the day, whatever it is, as a kind of regular, constant training. And I see our work really as, like sports athletes, by way of speaking. It is normal that we have training every day in some form or way, and days of rest, of course, and we have our coaches and our diets we take care of. So, but this is high intensity work. So what is my daily practice to keep my muscles, the subtle muscles, my energetic muscles alive? So that's what I kind of see I'm doing on a daily basis. Then going anti-clockwise, the joy in the self-care and the being really on seeing the beauty in everything that is in front of me, even a concrete road with a crack in the middle and a flower comes up, or these small things that make me giggle, and being surprised by, like Mary, you said before also, like life will go beyond us. Like we're just a momentary glimpse of something, and to cherish that, not to undervalue that feels also really critical for me. And that can be also like, okay, I have done a hard work, I totally deserve a beautiful cup of tea with a nice little sweet, or whatever it is. That I'm not talking about addictions, but I talk about these moments of really giving a form of a signal to myself: I love me, I love you, I love and I am here for you, which I have a big critic. So I have a lot of practices of, think I'm not good enough, or I'm not what this or that. But yeah, also there, rewiring my own pattern of working against my own self, and being in that self-care place. Then the personal development, that's really acknowledging I am embedded in a system that is informed by intensity, challenges, including trauma. And no matter how deep my own personal traumas are, I clearly carry intergenerational stuff and surely also collective stuff. And there may be shadows, and I did have my phases, and maybe will ever again moments of depressions or moments of low and moments of confusion and really being lost. And then to be able to reach out for help. So that's another big part for me. Like, this is not just about what I have to do with myself, but someone also wrote in the chat about the Sangha. Who are my peers? Who are my support team? Who are my, elders, by way of speaking? Maybe that they're not my blood lineage, but who are they? And just to be very transparent, when I went into COP and when I said I will take this work again, in both years, I asked friends and colleagues and colleagues who are in the similar way of practicing to help carry this field for me. And so I had a group of 20 people tuning in regularly, meditating with me at similar times, etc., just to acknowledge I cannot do that on my own. I'm not going in there on my own. It would be stupid, clumsy of me if I would pretend I'm the one who can do it all for these 120 people. So I had to also ensure that I have a good backup team. And I had moments where it was really a lot. And I reached out, can I quickly kind of, help make sense of what I just experienced? So also not to pretend it's just one-way street. So that's with kind of the personal development and including shadow work, whatever it is, whatever practices, being it family constellation, other forms of family therapy or personal, that include the somatic level as well. I think that's important for me there. To not only go into the kind of, thinking my problems through, but also feeling how they sit in my body and how they are informing the way I move and think and feel. And connection with nature, I mean, it's obvious, and it was said beautifully before. And it also, why it is so important to see ourselves as a small part of a much bigger whole, and see how it can help us metabolize, but also how it gives us new perspective and new forms of relating. And another part there that I became conscious of is I have a background as a family constellation therapist and systemic constellations, and I worked with quite some people who have migration background over generations, including having had to go to the US or generations had wanted to go. And I saw that their relation to intensity, what then could become trauma, was different than people who are still in a way on their land. And I don't want to generalize, but I saw that if I know where I'm from the mountains of Switzerland, and no matter if I live there or not, this is my land, and I have a deep connection to it. And I feel that in first place, I'm a part of it. And then I belong also to a social fabric and a social group. But I feel held by life. And that's kind of a deep imprint that I realize not everyone has, because maybe there is either the relation to a place wasn't so obvious given in the childhood, or it was already distorted because whatever. And again, each story is different. But I realized that especially for people who have gone through difficulties that we could also probably name as trauma dynamics, both in the personal and intergenerational level, if connection to land and place comes in, that often gives a stabilizing force once I can allow it. Once I can feel I'm actually held by something bigger, that also just speaker before me spoke about. And so cultivating that connection with nature and feeling held by something a lot larger, and with connection with nature, I include the subtle, that also started to become very clear, like, yes, I'm doing that. And I can see the effects when people feel they actually have maybe not a place that they belong to. And then the sense of having to belong to a social group is maybe even more critical. But if there are some fractions or tensions or some issues emotionally charged in it, then who else is there that can hold me? And the last, maybe it's obvious, is this energetic hygiene of acknowledgement. If I'm in an intense place or meeting, whatever conversation, being it officially work or private, how do I take care of the energetic imprints that has on me before I go to another encounter, conversation, meeting, work, so that I'm also not kind of hijacking in a way a space with an energy that has actually nothing to do with that. And I think that's especially as practitioners, maybe working with different groups and clients, etc., like always clearing my field before I enter a new field. And in that sense also not what do you call that? Spreading things that don't belong to a system, and then actually kind of like a virus, you know, like with COVID, like how do I take care that whatever I have, I'm not, that what doesn't belong to another person is not handed over. Sorry, I'm not native speaking, so sometimes I lose my transference. Thank you.
No, that's great, Luea. Thank you very much. Yes, transference from Porrick. So we're in the business with these webinars of trying to develop resources that will be helpful. So obviously we're particularly trying to develop resources that will be helpful to people who are involved in climate action. So bringing in this richness of resources and connections is super useful. I really welcome, you know, that you've mentioned several times about being trauma informed and the relevance of trauma to this work, and I think that's super important. That we thank you, Porrick. I think it's super important that we are trauma informed in the way that we work, and we haven't always given that the attention possibly that we need to. You mentioned migration as well, and you know, doing the kind of work we're trying to do, most of us in Ireland. Migration is an incredibly major factor, you know. So Ballyvaughan in County Clare, where the art college is, you know, the population's effectively doubled in the last couple of years as a result of migration, and you know, the Ukrainian communities that's there. So if we're talking about, you know, real actual climate action in Ballyvaughan, or you know, Listonvarna on the other side of the Burren, which got, you know, very large numbers of people who have come in internationally, migration is super part of that, and it's super connected in terms of, I don't know, how we care for each other, how, you know, how we feel about the other human beings on this planet. And then the other bit that I'm really grateful to see in your model, I suppose, is you mention of personal development, and that, you know, we're all works in progress, you know, so we all continue, we evolve, we're not finished, we're not kind of stuck, condemned to just finish up the way we are. And I think it's really useful to have this developmental perspective, and you know, we can get better at this, we can get better at the way we do this. So thank you so much. I'm aware of the time and wanting to keep us moving. When I was kind of thinking about the webinar in general, I was worried about this idea that if we overdwell on the self-care, and we overdwell on these poor individuals who are sick and burnt out or whatever, including ourselves, when that's not the whole way that mental health works. You know, mental health isn't just about how individuals look after themselves. It's not just, you know, that somehow individuals are weak, and because they're not good at looking after themselves, you know, that they end up in these situations. There's very definitely a collective perspective. And so for the kind of the next little while, I want to get into really the role of community in relation to burnout. So, we're in different collective settings. We're, in communities, in places, we're in communities of practice with people who do similar work to us. But it certainly feels to me, if community works well, it's enormously helpful to our well-being. And we often don't talk very much about what community working well is like, how that happens. So I think, where we're thinking of trying to develop resources that might be helpful, having some resources about the relationship between community and burnout will be useful. Having some insights into, what are we doing when we do community well in a way that supports people's health is potentially useful. So anybody who wants to put anything in the chat in relation to the role of community and how community can help well-being, that is really welcome. But I don't know whether you're, Luea, you want to just respond in a general sense, maybe to start with, about the role of community, how you see that in well-being. And I mean, you talked, where you were talking about the stories from the COP, you talked about the community. So it wasn't just about you as a facilitator of well-being, helping people. It was also about the community being a good community.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say there. I think just even in itself, to feel like I belong again, or I'm not alone, or I'm held and seriously, and from a place of trust, and really being able, I can show up vulnerable. And so for me, there is also different stages of a community, of a more pseudo community, or then really an authentic community, and that's something that needs to grow. So, but having that visceral experience, I'm held no matter what, no matter if I perform well or not. I'm just seriously, in a way, loved. I think that's it's a basic right, basic human right we all should actually be given. Yet, of course, we know some of us may have had childhoods where that was kind of put in question, or cultures where that was in one or the other way fractured, that sense of like, can I really be loved? Can I really belong? Can I really feel showing up with all I am, even though I may sometimes not know who I am? And that sense of, and I think there is a very thin line between like the community that then really holds us and also holds us accountable, but doesn't then create like, oh, we are the strong one against the other community, which also can happen, of course. Like, then I don't know in your relation in fields, but I sometimes have seen also that then communities who are fighting against the same things are then actually starting to fighting against each other, versus joining forces and creating synergies and widening their scope of community. And I think that, because it's so sensitive, because I think in first place we all want to just belong and be loved, and like our basic needs being met, which goes beyond just having food and water and a roof over our head. But that sense of have a place in my fabric, including my family, of course, but also the social group, or that I feel inclined. If that's under question, then my ground is shaking, like, like gentle tremblings in a way. And so for me, it's not so much what's the role of community within, towards burnout, but actually how do we cultivate a whole other culture of care and kinship, that we even, if that would occur, we have it in place. And I feel often things are not, the preconditions are not worked on prior, but then just like, oh, shit, now we don't know anymore how to deal with this. And I think a lot in societal change groups, I often, come in with the question, what can we do now in order that when things get rough, and they will, because that's the nature of the work. If it doesn't get rough, how do we even shift the patterns that led us to this crisis? But how are we preparing in the dry, let's say, before we go out on sea. That then when some people feel low, we have a whole backup team that just like an organism picks up what you said, Trace, before. I guess, I know from my own body, if my liver is weak, yeah, my kidney will jump in and support until a certain degree that it also gets too much for the kidney, and then, a whole other ripple effect. So and I experienced that at COP with our extended team. We had all different functions, we were all different organs, but because we knew each other, we kind of operated like we could pick up stuff, and we often didn't talk about it. It was just because we were all so switched on, by way of speaking. Anyway.
Oh, lovely. Nicola, I see you had a couple of comments in the chat there, so clearly something's resonating for you. So Nicola's from one of the other partners in the wider project, Facilitator, but maybe you might just like to come in and say a little bit about what's important for you in this part of the conversation.
Oh my gosh, like so much is resonating from the get-go. So I so appreciate Chris, you bringing Luea on and your presence in this conversation. And I just wish, I hope that this can just be, we can hit the ground running and begin to, no, I don't mean that, because I think slow is important, but like that this can be in all of these spaces more, because yeah, I'm just so interested in family constellations work, in the inner work, but then in systemic constellations work, I'm so intrigued. I hadn't heard of that before I'd heard of you. So yeah, it's so vital. And yeah, on my comments were more about my, just being a mum and being in community as a mum at the moment, and just like wishing for a world that really shared the responsibility of raising the next generations, and just like realizing that it's just so unbalanced, like leaving that honor to people. It can't usher in the world that we need, So that just feels vital. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. I was losing a little bit of quality there in terms of the line, but I think we got the most of it, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just moved by it because it's just such important work, and yeah, just how vital it is that we hold each other in all of the really important pieces of building this new world, and humanity, shared humanity, and interrelatedness with all species. Yeah, my line isn't great, I think, but I'm a bit emotional around it, but I really appreciate this conversation.
I really appreciate the emotions and the mum perspective, or the parent perspective. That I think that's with a lot of us. Certainly for me, I spend a lot of time in this context thinking about the future for my children. Also, Eileen, I really appreciate your comment there, and you talking about being vulnerable and imperfect, and your own kind of health history and so on. I don't know whether you want to come in, Eileen, or not. You're very welcome if you want to come in at this point in relation to you're saying community's been essential to your growth, and
yeah, I mean, I suppose this is quite personal, but I do have a history of severe mental illness, and I was recently tracking the kind of the history of breakdowns, for want of a better phrase. I had one in my teens, I had one in my 20s, I had one in my 30s, and so far I've managed to go through my 40s without it. And the reason for that is, I think, the community that I have managed to surround myself with. People who end up in places like this often don't have very strong families, as a generalization, and I wouldn't have that family support. and what little families I support has are, you know, of the type and generation that kind of deny mental health issues. And I think here what tends to happen is, you know, people will say to me things like, you know, are you okay? And it's only in that mirror that I realize, actually, I'm not. But if I didn't have those people who felt comfortable saying that to me, people that I felt comfortable I could confide in, and kind of, as I said, just being vulnerable and being imperfect. And I realized there's a little kind of network, and people that I do that for do it for me. So there's this kind of mutual support. It's not scripted or decided, but recently, just looking back at that, I realized that that heads off crisis. It's not that it changes the underlying issues or anything, but it just has that little bit of intervention, that little bit of a mirror, and that has been huge for me.
Great, thanks, Eileen. And I'm just seeing the other comments there. Yvonne and Neve, I don't know if either of you want to come in, and then maybe we'll go back to Luea for some closing comments as well. But Yvonne, your comments remind me of, I suppose, one of my kind of guru figures I would have worked with a bit is Meg Wheatley or Margaret Wheatley, who sometimes says, you know, whatever the problem, the answer is community. And then sometimes she adds to that, whatever the problem, the answer is community. In fact, it's local community. So making the distinction, it's not just a, you know, a global Facebook group or something. And that keeps coming up. You know, I'm a facilitator. I get pulled into all kinds of environments, and it's an extremely valid perspective as far as I'm concerned, that actually you can completely look at things that they always come back to community. Do you want to add anything, Yvonne? No.
Well, not particularly, other than it's just been my very lived and practical experience here, being active locally. You know, I used to think that just a small group of us who really cared could change things and get stuff done ourselves, or that you know, the cause would be enough to convince people. But actually, I think people respond. They respond to community needs. They respond to community effort. And more now, I think our local communities they're actually under threat, so they need minding, and they need us to take care, and they need us to give community real attention. And I used to think that was a different effort to the climate activism, but now I'm beginning to realize, or I feel myself, that my best chance of having impact and success locally in my own space is by whatever contribution I can make to bring the community with me and enrich the community, and try and work through the community force, and that minds me as well. So if I feel like I've come a bit of a circle in that regard, so it's really welcome to hear you naming that.
No, thank you. And it's interesting. So I think, within the ecology of climate activism or whatever, there's lots of space for lots of different kinds of people doing different kinds of things. Some climate activists can be quite annoying to people in wider community. I think it is fair to say that's probably not too controversial. And it's an interesting view yet. So climate activism by doing community well, as opposed to by being annoying. I tend to go with the idea of we probably need it all. We need an ecology of different things. Neve, and then maybe Kathy, and then we'll go back to Luea. So did you want to come in at all, Neve?
Sure, thank you. Well, first I just want to say thanks so much for what everyone shared and for this space. I guess what I was speaking about looking for in this community here, and when I'm saying, I'm laughing to you, like work, just being a member of my community, the area I live in, citizen and all that, but that support, it's community what is needed really, first and all round. But I'm just going for a note I've heard to myself I had from before about the soil needs healing and our relationship with each other. And I came in the door before this talk today thinking about that, because I was like, I would work, when I'm saying work, I do, I'm an artist with a disability and a range of health conditions the last while, but still powering through to have my work with the food and in the local food, and that all involves people and community, but it can be quite full on and draining when you're in that environment sometimes. And I was just thinking, coming back today from something this morning, I was like, have I been, that question, looking for community, but what have I given, or have I showed up for my community? Because I put on all these things and organize stuff and expect people to connect and get on with it, but then sometimes when you're not, it can be just as important showing up or showing your face there for something for others to connect with. So it's just a lot. Sorry, I've gone on a little tangent, a lot of resonating there with our talk today, but speaking about not moving away from care, but that thing of you can also be, you showing up for other people in the community is giving back as well, just by even being in a group like this, or at a meeting, or in a space. But just that also, this is from, unfortunately, my experience so far with some work I'm trying to do regarding, say, climate action and the environment. It seems to still be kind of a tick the box thing here regards maybe funding or something like that, but I'm not really seeing the community gathering through it, or the use of just, this is a great way of using like organizing meetings and connecting community with the same values behind them, underpinning it, so it gives it a bit more force. So yeah, I'm gone on a little tangent there about community, but just that it's a good form of it from what I can see.
We need a whole load of tangents. I think those. Thank you. Kathy, I don't know if you want to come in with a quick comment. So
Yeah.
Kathy Fitzgerald has led loads of brilliant work around eco-social, I'm not quite finding the right word, but supporting artists to have a more of an eco-social approach. So it's really interesting what you put in your note there about, kind of, even though you've been a leader in a field, it's actually, the community of practice has actually been enormously a support for you. And I know you've in South County Carlow, you have loads of relationship with your community around you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, and a big thank you to Luea and Chris and for the Burren College hosting all of this, and whoever else has been involved. Grace Wells told me about this today. We've been working together, and even though we've been in this field for a long time, we're both feeling a lot of frustration, lack of resources. I jumped into an Irish organisation, Minding Creative Minds, suggesting that there would be support for people working in this field, and there was a blank look from everyone. I said I thought there could be some ecotherapists on hand. Anyway, so I have been trying to do that. I also, with my colleague from the get-go and teaching eco-literacy, and more due to his knowledge of this area, particularly in California, he's quite associated with the research on compassion practice. He said it's just an ethical duty of anybody teaching eco-literacy or values for this new world that we have some sort of contemplative practice, or help people think about being in nature, Luea, all the things that you mentioned. I love that diagram. I'm a visual person, and I print it out. But I also help people, creatives, go through grief literacy as well. There's quite a lot of resources on that. And just to share a brief example of being held, my home area in New Zealand a year ago to this month had its biggest ever natural disaster, extreme weather event, supercharged cyclone. 11 people died in my home area, $15 billion worth in damage, bridges, no telephone reception for a month. This is a first world country, and even from 10,000 miles away, I felt deeply emotionally discombobulated. But I was teaching at the time. I was teaching the Earth Charter course about values, and I felt held. I explained why I felt wobbly and emotional, and I was wondering if I should do that. But I felt this great sense of being supported, like I was in a nest or like one of these currachs, these little boats, and they were all on this rocky ocean together. But I felt it was something that I've really treasured. But I do find this a really tricky area, that it's not been acknowledged by Irish policymakers. I know Creative Ireland talks about well-being in a general sense, but this idea of people already having trauma, intergenerational trauma, trauma from colonisation, the depth of this area is not really been articulated. So thank you so much for this morning.
Thank you, Kathy. I think we're only just starting, really.
Yeah.
You know, it feels to me I'm so grateful to you, Luea, for helping us get into this space. And Evan has said, can he do a plug? So I'm going to come back to him after Luea. Luea, having spent this nearly 90 minutes together and had this conversation, what's with you now? What's at the front of your mind now?
Two things. I mean, so many things. First of all, it's very beautiful to be in conversation with you all, and through the comments or through the ones that have shared with voice. Yeah, and feeling, because I sometimes also wonder, maybe it's just my thing, but then feeling, there is resonance, gives me, okay, then we can drop deeper together. And just to name that diagram I had was actually meant to then also make, and I'm currently working on it, like, how would that look like for us as groups? What are the practices that we, in a way, and of course, not to say it should be this tradition or that, but like the kind of practices that I am now witnessing are supportive, like, food is something that brings us together, but also reflection and contemplative practices and developing together, developmental friendship as a core way of being with each other, and naming that as an important not only personal practice but interpersonal practice, and really claiming that each organization that tries to tackle different difficult, complex things that are often intertwined with some form of pain, actually making sure that they have their bearings ready and explicit and practiced and live. And I think that's, so just to name that, I feel there is a next level of collective capacities that are really needing to be made explicit, no matter what are the topics that we are working for. And the other thing is also, and that's my personal wish also, to probably also to be more having more articulation around community. I think if we name it in this context, we have a sense of like a community that's caring and loving and kind. But I also have experienced sometimes then it creates this kind of, you have to be in a certain way in order to belong, and if you're not, then you're are at the risk of. So I think we are talking here about a particular, probably almost level of presence or awareness that we bring to creating a community that cares deeply for each other without then excluding something that seems a bit different. Or I'm personally more an introvert person, so I need time of myself. So if people would, then think I don't like them because I don't show up for each offering, we would have a huge problem. So there's also some, I feel a curiosity in me hearing all of you to be more explicit and more delicate of the word use community, because I think some of us are also traumatized by how they were part of communities and had to kind of find their way out, to not be under almost a spell of a certain atmosphere or so. And again, that comes back to, I think this is as one of the core things of that, Otto Scharmer and Thierry Yu talks about these three divides: the social divide, the ecological divide, and the spiritual divide. And there's a lot of pain also around community, and we don't have, again, so good role models that leave us free and where we can unfold in unique ways, yet feel belonging without that it then becomes a threat or so. So I feel there is also some, in itself, community is a wonderful experimental space and laboratory and practice space to reweave how we relate, including to beyond the human. So for me, community is always including also other forms of life that I do have a relationship with, and I feel being in community. Yeah. Anyway, deeply grateful. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely deeply grateful. I can feel myself breathing. So I just kind of feel, breathing and wanting to be part of reweaving. We are at our finish time. Let's do a couple of plugs or invitations to Evan and Eileen, and then we'll turn the recording off. And if anybody's got anything they urgently want to say, we'll cope with it. But we'll move quickly to a formal closing. So, Eileen, do you want to talk about the session next week, the webinar next week?
Thanks, Chris. So it's very timely, given that our communities operate at different levels. The final webinar in our series next week is going to look at the pros and cons of formal and informal networks. At present, we don't really have a formal network for place-based centres in this country, or even the entirety of the community climate action space. So we're going to take a look at that, and it's going to be hosted by Susie Khan from Carrickdoola Permaculture Farm, and she's going to have speakers from Permaculture UK. They have what they call a land network, which is learning network demonstration projects across the UK, which is a self-funding network. And then the Scottish Communities Climate Action Network has recently gotten some funding for an externally funded network. So those guys are going to be speaking, and hopefully after that we may decide, or that may influence how we might progress with a network into the future. So next Friday, 12:30, anybody who is on this webinar, you can use the same link to register for that one.
Great, thank you, Eileen. So go gently, everyone. And we've edged onto some fairly difficult, fairly heavy stuff during the last 90 minutes or so, but hopefully you're in a good place. And certainly for me, one of the most important things in all this work is, none of us should be alone, except for acknowledging Thomas's comment as well, that sometimes we need to be alone, but none of us should be completely alone in this work. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Thomas, for your thanks. And if anybody wants to go, please go. If anybody wants to stay for a few minutes and just say a few things in a slightly more informal circle, you're very, very welcome. And thank you so much, Luea. It was brilliant. I knew you would be brilliant, and you were brilliant.
Thank you for inviting and for this warm space to sink into. Thanks so much, everyone. Wonderful to meet you.